In the ongoing inquest into the death of the Cradock Four, the Gqeberha High Court heard testimony from high-ranking apartheid-era police officers. Gerrit Erasmus and Izak Krappies Engelbrecht, both former officers, denied any involvement in the 1985 murders of anti-apartheid activist Fort Calata, Goniwe, Sicelo Mhlauli and Sparrow Mkonto. The four were abducted and killed after being stopped at a police roadblock. Erasmus, a former Major General, told the court he was not in the Eastern Cape at the time of the murders and denied ordering any surveillance on Goniwe. Engelbrecht refuted allegations that he had covered up the killings. The inquest continues as the families of the Cradock Four persist in their decades-long search for justice. To give more insight on this, we're joined live by reporter Sisipho Ngcumbe, who has been covering the trial quite excessively. Sisipho, let's perhaps start there with the testimony that we heard from one of the apartheid-era police officers, Van in this past week, who had made a special request to the court to not be asked and to not lead testimony on parts of this matter that he had already testified to all the way back in 1993. And the court said no. Can you give us a sense of what that interaction was?
It was I'll say this, having sat in the two sittings that have happened thus far in this third inquest, this past week that we've been through has been certainly one of the more tense, the tension in court between legal representatives, and certainly you could see the family become very animated as the inquest went along. And on Thursday and Friday, we had testimony from Yul Fandes. And he is a pivotal witness, and of course he's a person of interest as well in this matter. So he was a pivotal witness in that it is alleged, or he testified at least in the 1993 TRC hearing that it was the Zitzman hearing, as I'm sure those who would have followed the trial would have heard that a lot. The Zitzman, because what came out from that hearing was that he had sent the signal that ultimately had the Cradock Four murdered, and his signal was calling for the permanent removal of Matthew Goniwe, Fort Calata, as well as Mbulelo Goniwe from society, understanding that in that context we were also given a lot of context that at the time Cradock was really the heart of resistance. So there was a need that was seen by the apartheid state at the time to permanently remove these, if I can put it in inverted commas, troublemakers, as they would have called them. So Yoful's testimony was mostly about that. Although he said at least he hadn't added the names of Mbulelo Goniwe and Fort Calata on the signal. He had sent a signal speaking about Matthew Goniwe and how he is, a troublemaker, but still saying that it was the permanent removal, and still kind of almost implementing or implicating that he hadn't called for them to actually be killed. But he did say that he will adhere by the findings of the Zitzman inquest, which did eventually rule that permanent removal meant to, kill Matthew Goniwe and, of course, the other men that we now know as the Cradock Four.
Yoful is passing down a part of the blame for adding the other names to his deputy at the time. And he had also given earlier testimony that he didn't consider particularly Fort Calata and Matthew Goniwe as terrorists, that rather they were being considered to be activists. That is to say, it was around how they were preaching and teaching to the community and the young people in particular, not that they were a threat to the state by taking up arms there. And that distinction is what seems to be the justification for why they were surveilled. Give us a sense of how that played out.
Yes, and it's such a direct contrast, Oliver, between his testimony and if you had heard Craig Williamson. Craig Williamson was also a person of interest. Of course, he denied any involvement in this matter, but he received amnesty for his part in the deaths of Ruth First, as well as he was very involved in sort of the surveillance and so forth. But when we heard his testimony explicitly said that he believed, or they believed, that they were in a war. So to hear then a couple of days later, Yul Fandes, who was also part of the security system in apartheid, saying that they didn't consider them as, a threat in that much or as terrorists. So there was quite a contradiction there. But of course, everyone is, giving their own testimony. But so as the week played out, you heard a lot of people saying, I wasn't involved in it, but there was an acceptance or an understanding of things and how they were at the time and how Cradock had become the epicenter. As you said, Oliver, they were teachers. Matthew Goniwe was a teacher, Fort Calata was a teacher, and they really tried to instill into the students from what we heard. And we heard this in the first sitting back when the families could testify as well. We heard that they really tried to instill into children or into young people that were growing up. They tried to instill into them that, Bantu education is a tool that's being used, try to empower the children, black consciousness at the time. So to hear how these different testimonies came up and how one side said, yes, they were absolutely a threat, even though they weren't my threat, as Craig Williamson said, because he dealt with international matters. But still to hear then Yul Fandes and a couple of, days later say, no, actually they were not, they were just activists. So there was that contradiction a little bit, and watching that play out, and certainly the family's reaction to that was pretty interesting.
The state made very interesting arguments pertaining to Craig Williamson and Yul Fandes, and I think it was Advocate Temga Ngqeberha that made the argument that said Craig Williamson is a fundamentally dishonest person and that they're seeking out to demonstrate that in court. And similarly, the state once again wanted to make the case that Yul Fandes is in fact lying about some of the events that had transpired there. Can you frame for us what it is that the state sought to frame as the dishonesty by the witnesses?
Well, there's also the issue of their advanced ages. So, as I said, throughout all four witnesses, we heard the repetition of them saying that I emphatically deny any involvement that I may have had, right? So if I believe it was Erasmus who said that I actually don't remember, he's of course 89 years old. So that's where we would hear the state as well as Advocate Ngqeberha, who's acting, on behalf of the Cradock community. That's where we heard them really challenge those testimonies of you really don't remember, and as you said, of course, Advocate Ngqeberha coming for Craig Williamson and saying, why would we believe you now? You've spent your career lying, deceiving people. So why would this day, in this courtroom be the time that we need to believe you? And again, there was a reaction from the gallery at that very moment. So it certainly was interesting to see those sort of dynamics play out in the courtroom, and to see the arguments that were put forth, throughout the week.
Yeah. Sisipho Ngcumbe, thank you so much for that report. Really do appreciate it.